organized between the Spanish National Research Council, the ECO-ERC Advanced Project, the European Society of Historical Demography, and funded by the BBVA Foundation. And we are back to this place after a couple of years. We have Margarita del Val the other day in the main hall, and we are going to have back here the demography to these areas, to this room. And we have the pleasure today to have Michel Oris. He's a professor at the Institute of Demography and Socioeconomics at the University of Geneva. Quite soon, hopefully, he will be full professor at the Spanish National Research Council in a few months. He has been co-director of the Swiss National Center of Competency in Research, Lives, Overcoming Vulnerabilities, Life Course Perspectives. He also founded the program of Socioeconomics and Demography in the University of Geneva. He was president of IDELF, the main association of demographers in French language, and of the Société de Démographie Historique, the French Historical Demography Association, and he is now Secretary General of the European Society of Historical Demography. His research focuses on inequalities, with an emphasis on health and living conditions of the older adults, and on the interaction between individual trajectories and the dynamics of social structures. And he will be talking today mostly about that, on a talk on the accumulation of disadvantages, a critical assessment.
This is a personal research, but also a team research, so I'm glad to cite my colleagues, Rainer Gabriel, Andrea Sille, and Marie Barisville. Originally, I prepared a purely theoretical presentation. Then I thought that it could be a little bit boring for you, and I inserted some empirical illustration from our research on the Swiss older adults. In this case, we will take those empirical illustration from a survey we did 10 years ago approximately, where we surveyed the health and living condition of 3,000 Swiss older adults. It was a sample stratified by sex and by age groups to have enough oldest old, and also into three main linguistic regions of Switzerland. Italian, French, and German speaking region. But what was quite original at that time was the use of a life calendar, where we asked to each of the 3,000 persons to tell us about their life from the cradle, from their birth, until the date of the survey. And each sampled participant received a life calendar starting with his or her year of birth. It was personalized. And we have been quite surprised because some older adults can have health problems, cognitive impairment, and so on, but most of them liked so much to do this exercise. We had a large variety of appropriation, but the results were even more than our expectation reliable, because in other part of the survey we asked questions about the matrimonial status, about the number of children, and so on. So we could make several tests, and in fact it was extremely reliable. You have some little problems with adopted children, with the reconstruction of families after divorce and so on, but globally it was very good. And so this is a marvelous opportunity to look at the life course construction of inequalities across the life course. At the survey, at the date of the survey in 2012, we know if the people are economically poor, if they accumulate the symptoms of depression, if they have problems of functional health, and so on and so on. And we can look how those disadvantages have been constructed across the life course. When we realize this exercise, well, I skipped that, we first meet the long arm of childhood. Of course, everybody, please, who has had only a little introduction in social science is aware of the power of social reproduction. When you are born in a poor family, your risk of ending your life in poverty increase considerably, to not say tremendously. But if this is well known and well verified, unfortunately, less researchers are taking into account the importance of the school system, of the state in the social reproduction. In many countries, you can observe that kind of process. When adult socioeconomic position captures the impact of childhood circumstance, it could simply reflect the continuity of condition across the life course. Life course sociologists see the school system as a phasing institution. By sequencing life course and by regulating the ways and extent to which individuals can acquire life course relevant resource and can use them in the biographical project, phasing institutions have a particularly strong impact on life course. Typically in Switzerland, when you enter your primary school, very soon you have to decide if you follow a trajectory going to the college and then to a tertiary degree, to the university or high school, or if you follow an apprenticeship, what is typical from the German-speaking countries. It means that you are half at school, half in an enterprise, learning theoretically and practically a real job, if I can say that. And it will decide of the rest of your life. You are phased in one or the other direction. And this Swiss school system was clearly taught to preserve the social structure of the Swiss society, and so the social continuity, the social reproduction. However, we have observed during the second half of the 19th century an incredible increase of the number of schools, a democratization of the secondary and to some extent of the tertiary levels of education. The expansion of secondary and tertiary education and training created career paths within and between educational institutions. It also moved young adults to labor market entry position at different levels, thereby minimizing or decreasing initial search mobility and more securely launching them on employment trajectories. In that perspective, education tends to ensure continuity in socioeconomic inequalities from the parental home to adulthood. In fact, there are 50, 60 years in Spain, maybe less because probably it's after the return of democracy, that all the school system have the ambition to break the social reproduction, to avoid children of poor people to become poor themselves. And basically, largely they fail. Whatever the country you are, but with the democratization of access to secondary and tertiary education, you secure some living style. With the secondary diploma during the 30 Glorious, okay, you could find a career, construct a career, find a position, pay school for your children and so on. You could realize an upward mobility. Maybe I need to be more concrete. We made this survey in 2012. My predecessor made similar surveys in 94 and 79. So we are very lucky because we can very strictly compare the evolution across 30 or 35 years. And in 79, 66% of the Swiss older adults had only the compulsory level of education or even not. In 2012, they are 18%. So it changed a lot the career opportunities that you can have. By the way, I will show you that the impact on the decrease of old age poverty has been tremendous. What is important also, I have to say, is that in the university, or more generally in the scientific world, we remain extremely compartmented. Within these 4 lives that Diego evoked, we try to organize a real interdisciplinary dialogue with the psychologists, between social science and psychological science. Because for the psychologists, typically childhood is a critical life period. Your affective, developmental development, your cognitive development, many things are depending of the childhood period. It's the same for the life course epidemiologists who are speaking about early life condition and the long-term impact on the rest of the life course. This man, Yakov Stern, has been extremely instrumental to develop the cognitive reserve theory, which is that when you can have longer education during your childhood or as teenager and so on, it's extremely efficient because it's the period of brain maturation. And so you can constitute a reserve that will help you all across your life. And I will come back on that. Now, when you make life course research, you look at the impact of education on old age poverty. It's horrible. If you had only, and it's extremely constant. In 1979, in 1994, in 2012, if you had only a low level of education, you are 2.5 more at risk of being poor as an older adult than if you have a secondary degree. And if you compare with a tertiary degree, you are 4 times more at risk. It's not so often in social science that you see a differential of 4. And you have more, I try to find my words in English, sorry. Cognitive impairment will happen early in your life, depending on your level of education. You are also more at risk of depression or functional health problem. You have a lot of outcomes. That's why we speak of the long arm of childhood, because those outcomes happen 50, 60, 70 years after you end your education. In those birth cohorts, ongoing education was almost inexistent. But after we come to the famous theory of cumulative disadvantage. The origin is an American sociologist, Richard Merton, who starts from the famous parable of Matthew in the Bible that you can read on the screen. Probably you already know it. And it has been at the origin of the theory. But by the way, the theory has been used by Merton to explain why some scientists have a very high index of citation and others have a low index of citation. So for the young or less young researcher, it could be a source of inspiration. But I will not speak about those poor scientists who have a high cognitive reserve or whatever. Now, Del Danafer, not an American scientist, is really the pope of life course of cumulative disadvantage theory that he defined as the systemic tendency for interindividual divergence in a given characteristic to increase with the passage of time. It means that you are two young girls born the same year, or two young boys. You have few differences, but systematically across life, you diverge. And at the end, when you look at the population of the young old, what they call the young old, people, let's say 65, 75, 79, it's the population the most heterogeneous that you can observe, whatever the criterion you look at. The most diverse population. After you have differential mortality, and you come back to some extent to homogeneity. And once again, what is funny is that sociologists and psychologists do not read each other, because from the cognitive reserve, psychologists developed the use or disuse hypothesis, which is basically that if you have a low level of education, a low cognitive reserve, quite probably you are doing a manual work, so you do not maintain or develop your cognitive reserve, and so the divergence increase once again. It's not a question only of working life, but also of differential leisure. And recently some colleagues stressed the importance of the social and family networks that can also stimulate you cognitively across your life. But so this theory of cumulative disadvantage is often presented not only by me in the abstract, but by many important scholars as one of the most influential theories in social science of the last 4 or 5 decades. And here we come back to Dale Danafer, who wrote relatively recently, 4 years ago, over recent decades, evidence supporting cumulative disadvantage as a cohort-based process that produce inequalities on a range of life course outcomes has steadily increased. So what he says is the empirical investigation are supporting the theory. And here you have Glenn Elder. Glenn Elder is one of the inventors of the life course studies with a very famous book, The Children of the Great Depression, where he followed a cohort of children who experimented as child the Great Depression just before the Second World War, and he followed them until late in their life. And with some colleagues, he reached a completely different conclusion. There is surprisingly little evidence for cumulative process, and a wide variety of model specification remain completely untested. So you have two prominent figures of life course research who have read the same papers, the same research, and who arrived to completely opposite conclusions. And by the way, I have had the pleasure to meet Dale Danafer and Glenn Elder. They will probably not spend a vacation together, but those guys are not enemies. I mean, it's not a stupid polemic as it often exists in a very little world. They really disagree. And that's the starting point for me. Okay, everybody agrees on the long arm of childhood, but a full disagreement on the life course, on the cumulative disadvantage theory. Why? A first explanation is that Dale Danafer and most of the people, me also some years ago, we tend to consider that, okay, you accumulate advantage and you accumulate disadvantage and the gap is growing. That there is a symmetry between the two processes. And in fact, it's not true at all. First, Kenneth Ferraro and Michael Schaeffer came with a very, very good suggestion. It's that when you start well in life, when you have a wealthy family, that your parents have a good position, and they frequent people of the same level, but you start well, and each time you grow, you increase your opportunities to find a better job, to create better social contacts, and so on. In fact, the process of accumulating advantage is a question of growing opportunities. While the accumulation of these advantages is mainly an accumulation of risk, of constraints. None of us want to become Bill Gates because we all know that it is impossible. Okay? But if you have a university diploma, a family who has a lot of contact, you see a lot of doors that are open for you. If you are a poor people with a low level of education, with a family who has no power, and so on, and so on, and so on, okay, you see a lot of doors closed. By the way, some of them are maybe open, but you have a low level of education. There are several opportunities that maybe you simply do not know that they exist. So it's really two different processes. So if we follow that, it's totally horrible and catastrophic for the people who are going down. But we have to keep in mind the government of life course, the institutionalization of life course through the welfare systems that have been constructed mainly at the national level after the Second World War, with many differences between Scandinavia, Mediterranean, conservative, liberal, and so on. But that the safety net could be modest. I mean, Switzerland, it's a mix of conservative and liberal ethos in the welfare state. So they are not so kind with the poor people. Or you can be in Scandinavia, but whatever, when you fall down, you reach this safety net that avoid you to end dying from hunger in the street, at least. So, in fact, what we see is not an accumulation of disadvantage, but an accumulative continuity. It's your chance to make an upward social mobility that are almost inexistent. Almost, but not completely, by the way. This cumulative continuity is really related to social intervention, to the welfare regimes. Here, I wanted to illustrate that, I look my watch, through some Swiss data. Here you have in blue the prevalence of poverty by gender, woman and man, and by age group in 79, 94, 2011, 2012 anyway. And you see here in 79, half of the Swiss older adults, one of the most wealthy countries in the world, I mean, half of them had monthly income before the poverty threshold. And so, and it's a mix, a macro-micro interaction. At the macro level, the Swiss population voted a universal pension system in 1948. But within this system, you need to pay during 40 years to have a full pension. So in 79, many people did not receive a full pension because they simply did not have the time to pay during 40 years. The system reached this inefficiency more and more, and you see here pension in 79, red in 94, and a strange color before, sorry, in 2012. You see that progressive implementation of the welfare system worked, but with a time gap that was considerable, in fact. It's relatively funny, if I can, because the welfare system was highly criticized during the neoliberal period at the end of the 20th century, when it finally was efficient. So a kind of usual contradiction. Here I wanted to go back from the empirical research to the theory. In fact, what is important for us is those micro. Here you have an individual, a real person who has some resource, who faces stressor, life trials, life accident, and you see the outcomes. The person is able to cope with the life accidents or not. And the accumulation or the continuity will depend on that. But this individual is not isolated. It is a manual workers, or it is a scientist, or it is someone with a position in an enterprise, and so on. The family is also an important source of resource, but not the same for everybody. And you have also the welfare institution and the social policies. There are also some other elements that I will introduce in a few minutes. The stress model is inspired by the work from the psychologist, because we speak of a resource or a stress model, and originally it was a stress model anyway. You have here Leonard Perlin. You can read some papers of Leonard Perlin. It's incredible. You do not arrive to guess if he is a psychologist or a sociologist. It's someone who really succeeded in interdisciplinary research. But that's not the main issue. The main issue is to avoid to be too simple, to integrate the complexity of life and of the influence on individual life course, and to not be completely lost. That's why you need that kind of model. And for us, it was an important step. Now, we have a second explanation why Dale Danafer and Glenn Elder disagree together. I come back to the definition of Dale Danafer. The systemic tendency for interindividual divergence in a given characteristic to increase with the passage of time. So, okay, up. But life is not up. Life is not smoothed. In life, as we just noted, you have some turning points. You can miss your first year of study at the university, and suddenly you feel the opportunities change. You have to do something else from your life. Some bifurcation impact more brutally, more decisively the following of your life course. You can do that. You can really fall. You can enter in vicious circles. You lost your job. You become depressed. At the end, you divorce. Blah, 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 blah. So life is not smoothed. We have to look more seriously at the life transition and their role in the accumulation of advantage or disadvantage. From that point of view, life course researchers make a difference between normative and non-normative transition. A normative transition is typically if you do not have a girlfriend or a boyfriend at 17, your peers will start to look at you, you will face some stigma and so on, things like. For many researchers, now the transition to adulthood is a new critical life period, and if you stay as a young adult unemployed during 3, 4, 5 years, you can keep long scarring effects all across the rest of your life. You can completely lose your self-esteem and things like that. Sorry, I have to avoid to touch this thing. But it could also be dangerous to follow the normative pattern, and it is especially dangerous for women. In this broad cohort, we have ample evidence by the historians and the sociologists and so on that women have received from all the channels of socialization when they were children and teenagers, that they had to realize themselves as married women, as mothers, as housewives, and so on. And here we reconstructed with cluster analysis on the data of the life calendar, reconstructed with Rainer Gabriel the professional trajectories. And we identified 4 clusters: full employment. You are in Switzerland. Huh? It's a country blessed by God or something like. Full employment, quasi-full employment, stop and restart, and start and stop. You are not incredibly surprised if I tell you that they are mainly male trajectories and they are mainly female trajectories. Huh? But with a very good labor market in Switzerland, it's possible to find again a job when your children reach the secondary school. That's not the case everywhere, of course. In that case, when you reached old age and you became a widow, what happens more often to women than to men, your situation started to be terrible. And we had really over poverty of the widows. That was striking. Because, of course, a very little accumulation within the pension system. A modest or almost absent accumulation. And at the very end of the 20th century, they changed the system so that the widow now inherit from 60% of the husband pension. And suddenly, in 2012, the over-poverty of widows disappeared. So from time to time, a social policy can really have a clear impact. But in the same time, this is an institutional and social construction across the life course because women were educated to fulfill this role, and the Swiss welfare system was constructed with in mind the idea of a nuclear family with a male breadwinner, a housewife, and so on. Here we have, I don't know honestly if it's the continuation of the second explanation or if it is a third line of talks about this disagreement between Dannefer and Elder. Agency and resilience and learning are to some extent, not completely, the opposite of scaring. Scaring, you remain scared by a life accident, by the trials of life. But Schaffer and Ferrer, one again, they are very original thinkers, came with a sociological conceptualization of resilience, which is originally a psychological concept, by the way. And they explained that the most important is to see, make a distinction between disadvantage. Okay, I'm disadvantaged, I have a few opportunities in life, I have to resign to do with my situation, or to consider that your situation is an adversity, a perceived misfortune, and from this perception you can start to try to do something. This is more. This is a very original French sociologist, Danilo Martuccelli. I heard talk of Danilo several times And one time about 2, I thought, oh, I'm more intelligent today. And one time about 2, I didn't understand anything of what he tried to explain. So quite an elaborate thing. For him, you can be forged by the trial. If you face a life accident, if you lost your job, but you do not, you stay active, you search another position, you even find a better position after, not after 2 months, it's too easy, but after 1 year, you learn it from this experience, you gain self-esteem, you have a capital of knowledge. Life course, it means an accumulation of life experience. You learn all across your life from your life experience. And so if you face again the same difficulties, you can, okay, I coped with one time, I will do it again. I know what to do. Probably it's not completely true that you know what to do, but you believe and you start well, let's say. It's often, more often the case with divorce. Okay, we did not succeed in a couple, but we succeeded in a divorce. We take care of the children, we have a good agreement together, we are better now than before. Okay, that's a way to see that you can be, you can gain from the life accident. A little bit strange, but why not? This is related quite pretty much to this idea of biographization that has been proposed recently by some original researcher who came from the study of poverty, but also invested life course research. And those people organize a new macro-micro dialogue. At the macro level, the young birth cohorts face more often period of unemployment, more divorce, more probably depressive episode, and so on and so on, whose life is supposed to be more chaotic, more marked by accident. But in the same time, those accidents are less important. When I was a young adult, a divorced woman, but no, half of the couples or more are divorcing. So, I mean, more frequent the life accident, less important the social stigma, the social judgment around the people who are facing those accidents. More normal is this accident, are those accidents. And so the idea of biographization is that you have more and more lives, but not with Russian ills, but more and more life course with Russian ills. And it helps resilience, because if you face real trauma, being resilient, I'm more skeptical personally. Learning from modest accidents, okay. Learning from a big accumulation of problems, it's less sure. Okay. And here we come back again to a theoretical proposal. And this time it's not anymore a circular process, it's more a longitudinal, a linear one. And again, the challenge is to integrate the complexity of the life, the multidimensionality of life course, sorry. You are not just a worker, you are also a family members, you have social participation, multidimensionality of life course, and diversity of influence. But here, you have a longitudinal framework. you start with individual resource, and you can fully start from childhood and consider that it is a critical life period where you accumulate or not several resources that will be important to manage the following of your life course. And then, at some steps, you can face critical events that threaten you. And maybe you can be helped by some social intervention. Maybe you manage that yourself, or you manage that with your social resource, your family, your kin, your colleagues, whatever. You mobilize or not your resource. The mobilization of resource remains something that we do not really understand, by the way. And the result is that you can increase, if you are forged by the trials, if you gain relevant experience when facing those critical events, you can stay stable. But keep in mind that when you face difficulties, staying stable requires a lot of effort. It's not given. Or you can accumulate the disadvantage, decrease your resource, and be more vulnerable to an additional life trials, to additional critical events. But what I like with this approach is that you have a lot of ambition. If you arrive to capture all those elements, to integrate all those dimensions in your analysis. But in the same time, we are never deterministic. We look at the causality of probable. Depending on the critical event, the probability is that you go down. But some people are going up. Not a majority, but some. I explained to you that when you have a low education, you are 4 times more at risk of old age poverty than if you have a university degree. But approximately 20% of all the adults who had a low level of education are wealthy. And at the moment, we are trying to sort of, who are those strange people? Because, I mean, from 1 to 4, it's almost deterministic. But no, it is not. There are some outliers who are highly interesting to study. At this stage, we can understand why Del Danefer and Glenn Elder disagree. It's probably because they do not define cumulative disadvantage in the same way. It's because they are both American. And so they do not take enough into account the welfare system, the welfare regime, which exists but is so different from the European ones in the United States. So this dimension of institutionalization of life course is not enough taken into account. I think it's the... oh, yes, sure. Maria, tell me.
In this model, when you speak about ups and downs will stay the same, are you talking in terms of social class?
For?
In terms of social class? I mean, what do you mean
no.
by social mobility?
No, social class will be here. But here you also have some psychological resource. For example, in a recent paper, we were surprised by the impressive impact of one of the personality traits, which is openness to experience. Even if you are born in a popular class family, if you have this personality trait, it's not 100%, but it changes a lot into life trajectories. And there are many other elements that can help the friendship networks, for example, is something that is completely understood and can be important also. But social class is a part of. It was developed by my colleagues in psychology, and we don't want a social science model. Oh, quite. Okay. But at this stage, what can we do better? I have two suggestions to end this talk. I look at, that is to say that the following criticism is not aggressive because it would be against myself. I look at the life course construction of old age poverty. I have colleagues who look at life course construction of cognitive score in old age. Authors at depression, authors at isolation or the feeling of loneliness and so on. But we are always looking at one outcome. Why, in fact, basically we find the same variables, or in many cases we find the same variables as being decisive. What suggests that those outcomes are associated together. So here I tried to look at not at disadvantage, but at disadvantages. Here you have the statistical association with economic poverty, each time controlled for sex and age. It's done separately because you have a lot of collinearity between all those indicators. But if you are economically poor, you are 5 times more. I scaled everything on 0 instead of 1 to make the figure more simple anyway. But you are 5 times more at risk to meet difficulties in ends meet. You have a strong association that I explained with low education. And here it's if your first or last job was cognitively at a low level, ask a few cognitive activity. It means that if you started poor in your life, you have indeed a lot of risk. Here it's the crystallized intelligence, the Mile test. That's terrible because the crystallized intelligence is the one that is supposed to be the most resistant to aging. The fluid intelligence is supposed to be affected by aging, but crystallized less. But here we see the importance of the disadvantage. Low social activity and no public engagement. It means engagement in association, as benevolent worker, things like that. You are at higher risk to have no friend you can fund on when you are old. You are, in terms of practical help from your family, you are at the lowest. Low level means the first quartile each time. Low emotional support. You have a bad subjective appreciation of your health quality of life, and you are more at risk to be dependent. And I'm sorry, you are more often a woman, but because of the gendered life trajectories that I showed you previously. But there is no association with the absence of contact with the family, with high level of family conflicts, with depression, with fluid intelligence, why I expect a totally opposite, and with the mini-mental state, and with multimorbidity and being worry is the state before depression on a depression scale. You do not reach the statistical threshold of signification, but you are really in this direction, in the direction of an association. Here I tried a factorial analysis. The results are very old. They are 2 days old. I finished it in tonight for you. And I made a factorial analysis because I thought that I could depress my audience. I took all the negative indicators, all the dark side of aging, and how they are related together. And in fact, the first axis and the second one together, they collect more than 80% of the variation. It's extremely rare that normally on the two first axes you have 60%. You open the bottle of champagne. So here it's really impressive. Okay, we have to continue in this way, but the suggestion is to not look once again at isolated, at separated outcomes, but at a system of resource, of low resource, but who they are connected together. The second suggestion is to not look at disadvantage at a given point in time, which is at the time of the survey, when we can calculate the indicators of disadvantage. In fact, with this survey, we made a second wave 6 years later. Why 6 years and not 5? Because it was difficult to raise the money at the budget. And it's quite expensive to collect the data. And we look at who the same individual changed, the aging trajectories. In fact, we were inspired by a colleague who worked on cognition, because from that point of view, there are ample evidence. I told you that it is the depressive moment. You are all university people, I believe. Otherwise, you are welcome. I'm not from a university family. But if you have a high cognitive reserve, you will face cognitive impairments later, but steeper. So it means that, how can I explain that? If you are looking at young old, you see the full impact of cognitive reserve. They are engaged, they have high score of cognitive tests and so on. But if you look at people aged 85 or 90, in fact, you can believe, high education leads to a low score. What happened? In fact, it's a classical confusion between cross-sectional and longitudinal results. So we thought, okay, we could look at that on other outcomes like poverty and so on. And here, a very popular theory is that the age has level effect. As I told you, you have a very heterogeneous population between 65 and let's say 75 or 80. And then you have differential mortality. The poor people are dying before the wealthy people, and so you have, at the end, you have less inequalities because of the selection by health and mortality. But in fact, it does not work. There are very good studies in Finland where they saw a lot of social inequalities at the age of 90 still. So, and in the Swiss, working on the Swiss data, I summarize, but what we saw, you have people, the long arm of childhood, they are born in popular class families. Most of them at a low, intermediate level of education, made manual job along their adult life. They didn't fall because of the 30 Glorious, because of the rich economic expansion of Switzerland, because of the welfare system, but they reach old age with a low pension because they had low salary all across their life and paid few to the Swiss pension system, which does not compensate between the rich and the poor. And then, in old age, they are more at risk to fall into poverty. In fact, we find the accumulation of disadvantage in old age and not before. So, quite unexpected, because we demonstrate the absence of this accumulation so much during the adult time, and at the end we find it during old age. And this is really related to health expense. You have health problems, a sudden expense, and you have no reserve because you have a low pension, you had a life with low salary, and up you fall down. So it was quite striking, and with a lot of implication. We tried to explain that to the political people. Look, you arrived to eliminate the widows over poverty. You can also act here. But okay, it will maybe take the next 2 or 3 decades. We will see. Anyway, you are still alive? That's my last slide. In fact, can we really do that? Looking at the system of the association of disadvantage, and moreover, in a longitudinal dynamic way. But it was almost impossible before because if you take the survey on health, aging and retirement in Europe, which is the best resource by far, it's not stratified by age. So until recently, you do not have enough oldest old. So if you make a statistical analysis on one disadvantage or on a set of disadvantage, your results are speaking about the young old and not about the oldest old. And it's controlling with dummy is not enough to eliminate that kind of effect. It's just because the share sample is like that. So you have not enough oldest old. So even with, they made the first retrospective life course, but anyway, we do not arrive to do something. And recently, they collected more than 62,000 life history in 27 countries. So the sample is always not stratified, but with this sample size, you have far enough oldest old. So my suggestion is really to work not on the full sample, but only on the sample of the oldest old, and then share also as, how can I say, after collecting the life history, it's also a panel. Each year they interrogate, they question the same individual. So you have the retrospective life history and you have the prospective life history, including, by the way, a COVID wave that did, of course, recently, as we all know. So I think that we are able to face the challenge. Of course, you can believe that I'm totally stupid to give you all my ideas, but in fact, as always, this is not the work that will miss, it will be the workers as always. So, muchas gracias vosotros, Diego and the BBVA Foundation. Thank you.